Hello and welcome to our GiveLoveLeeds podcast. We'll be delving into conversations being held across the city and learning more about how we can come together to create positive change for the communities that need it the most. Leeds Community Foundation distributes vital grants and gives trusted advice to voluntary groups and charities across Leeds and Bradford to influence positive change. Driven by creating meaningful social impact for thousands of local people every year, during 2020 and 2021, we've distributed $5.8 million across Leeds and Bradford. Today's host is Steph Taylor, Strategy and Programmes Director for Leeds Community Foundation.
Hi, my name's Steph Taylor from Leeds Community Foundation. Welcome to episode 5 of the GiveLoveLeeds podcast. In this episode, we'll be talking about the Men's Suicide Prevention Programme, which we've managed over the past 3 years. The main aim of it is to provide funding for voluntary and community organisations to support social activities for men and to provide outreach work with target communities to reduce social isolation. This is important because it can be difficult for public services to focus on prevention because of the pressures they're under. And often informal groups and charities working in communities can be the best place to start these kinds of conversations. Listening to people talk about suicide and mental health can be difficult. If you're having a tough time, we'll be sharing details of who can help at the end of the podcast, or you can go to the episode description now on your podcast platform and find them at any time. Today on the podcast, we'll be hearing from a couple of community groups about their work. But first, our Head of Grants at Leeds Community Foundation, Shahid Molvi, is going to tell us more about the Suicide Prevention Programme.
In 2018, we partnered with Leeds City Council Public Health to establish and run the Men's Suicide Prevention Programme. And we support a project by providing funding for community organisations to deliver social activities for men and to undertake outreach work with targeted communities to reduce their social isolation. Since 2018, this groundbreaking programme has enabled preventative work with men who are at the highest risk of suicide in Leeds. It's actually 5 times higher than women, and the suicide rate is higher than the national average. The fund itself has distributed over £240,000 in grants, supported 17 projects, which have benefited 1,378 men across the city. A variety of projects were funded through this programme, ranging from men's walking groups, a men's mental fitness group programme, which was about improving resilience, coping strategies, and health and wellbeing, and even live theatre performances to raise the awareness of men's mental health issues.
We're now going to welcome to the podcast Duncan Millard from Wellbeing. Wellbeing aims to reduce mental health inequalities by enabling vulnerable and marginalised people to support each other to develop strategies to manage their mental health. Through the Men's Suicide Prevention Programme, Wellbeing set up a project called Survive and Thrive. The project provided training to community cafe volunteers. Wellbeing trained 46 food bank and COVID community support volunteers in 3 8-week suicide prevention training courses and 3 half-day listening skills and signposting technique courses. These courses covered a range of topics such as masculinity and mental health, using listening skills to connect, ways to wellbeing, signposting, and looking after one another's wellbeing. Welcome to the podcast, Duncan.
Thank you, and thanks very much for having me.
It's really nice to have you here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the project?
Yeah, well, we're really interested in mental health and gender. So, suicide is a particularly gendered thing. In Leeds, 83% of suicides in the last Leeds suicide audit were men. It's an issue that affects men more than women. Why is that? Nobody really understands fully, but men are much less likely to be diagnosed with depression or anxiety than women. And the way we construct what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how we behave, the choices we make, the attitudes and the beliefs we have affect our mental health hugely. And I've worked in mental health for most of my life, and I've seen men and women having completely different issues. And a lot of those issues stemming from that culture of what we think it means to be a woman, what we think it means to be a man. So what Wellbeing does is really, so I was aware of suicide as an issue and also aware that it particularly affects isolated men. And I was in my local pay-as-you-feel cafe a few years ago, the much missed Toast Love coffee in Hare Hills, and sitting there with my daughter and noticing quite a few men coming in by themselves and sort of sitting in the corner and having a cup of tea. And it was kind of really noticeable that this is an easy place. A cafe is an easy place to come in, and you choose to go there because you want company, don't you? You know, we go into cafes, we can make a cup of tea at home, right? But you go into a cafe quite often because you just want to be around people. That was noticeable, but more noticeable than that was the way the volunteers could just come, give the cups of tea and chat, and just start chatting to these blokes and making those connections. And it kind of really struck me, you know, maybe this is the kind of place where men who are quite isolated can actually just quite easily come and connect. So I went and talked to the manager and said, you know, what's happening here? You know, who's coming in, and, you know, what happens? What do the volunteers do? And I started to understand that in these cafes, a lot of people are coming in who are really in crisis, who are really struggling. And these volunteers, they've got these great skills in connecting and listening and chatting to people, but they're feeling totally overwhelmed. If you sign up to be a volunteer and give cups of coffee out or whatever, you don't necessarily expect you're going to have to be listening to pretty harrowing, difficult stories about somebody, you know, really, really being stuck in difficult situations and maybe even having suicidal thoughts. And the volunteers were feeling overwhelmed and they were feeling stuck and they didn't know what to do. And I thought, hey, you know, maybe we can do something here. Maybe we can help those volunteers to have a more positive interaction. So that's where it all started, really. We started talking to more cafes, community cafes, and we put together this program to look at the listening skills, as you mentioned before, and the signposting skills. So that's what this training's based on. It's based on these connections that these cafes and food banks already have and the wonderful skills that the volunteers have, but also on that path of hope.
It was really inspiring to hear your authentic journey into starting the project. And often that community connection we hear time and again at the foundation is what makes a difference in helping people towards positive outcomes, whatever challenges people are facing and whatever the outcome that's positive is to them. And I think, you know, describing the time that you've spent in cafes with people and that journey and how long that journey can take to just listen, and the time and space for that feels really important to me in what you've said. I wonder if you could share a little bit about the feedback you've had from men that have taken part in the project.
Well, there's lots of different examples. I'll give you two quite contrasting ones, really. Okay. Here's a volunteer at the Rainbow Junction food bank in Hyde Park. Because I've got to say, you know, obviously we did this project for a year in cafes, and then we thought 2020, let's do some more community cafes. And then this thing called COVID happened, and suddenly cafes were not really a thing. So we started working with food banks. Food banks are quite a different matter. You've got the same people coming in, but probably even more desperate. Over the pandemic, the Trussell Trust estimated that about 70% of people using a food bank had somebody in that household who had mental health issues. So really, the sort of issues people in food banks were dealing with got much more severe. And you're in a situation where volunteers are talking to desperate people in a car park or on a pavement, and they're trying to deal with those. So that training we were doing, from being in cafes in their spaces and training them, suddenly I'm doing it on Zoom with people, volunteers who are, when everyone else is furloughed, most people, these volunteers are absolutely frontline workers. And imagine, you know, standing on the pavement as a volunteer, trying to talk to somebody in crisis and deal with it. Well, here's one story of somebody from Rainbow Junction, a truly amazing project in Hyde Park. This is some feedback from a volunteer. I've got lots and lots of examples of people we've supported using what we've learned on the course. But one that comes to mind is a chap that at first, when he came to us, he didn't want to talk to anyone, like he was putting on a brave face. Eventually, he came to the food bank one day, suicidal with plans. I think he was dragged in by someone else. However, he was shown the kind of compassion, kindness and listening and support that he needed. And since then, he's begun to turn his life around. Speaking to him, he said he could talk to us, although at that time he didn't want to engage with mainstream services because, as he put it, you knew my name. All these little things helped. We always checked in. We always made sure he was listening to. The active listening training on Survive and Thrive definitely played a part in that. Now I'm trying not to save the world, but just listening and not trying to make it different. But then just by listening, you do make it different. Week 4 of the course about the cycle of change was huge to me. Understanding that someone can go round and round messing up and not getting it right, but we can remind them that we're still here and that's not the end. They can keep trying. So many people have said to us, I've tried again, and they know we're here. There's so many people I could tell you that we've helped. This course has made such a difference. That particular example is a guy who did get connected to crisis services in the end that he needed to. And that food bank has said that they feel sometimes like they're the 5th emergency service because people who feel as though they've been rejected by mainstream services can come to that food bank and know that they're going to get listened to again.
I think we're very lucky in Leeds to have a large number of organisations and opportunities to signpost people to, in terms of what you talked about there, Duncan, around the different sorts of things that, that might help people who are having suicidal thoughts or struggling with their mental health. I'm just going to ask you to talk a little bit about humans being in general, because the Survive and Thrive project is just a part of what you do. And tell us about your wider work and what the future looks like for you guys.
So what Humans Being does is really being sensitive to those gender issues. We run a lot of courses for women. Our big course is called Women Supporting Women. We always work with other organisations. So we go into the community and we run them with loads of different community centres. We just finished one with Naruka's Soup Kitchen. She's an excellent soup kitchen, food bank type organisation in Hare Hills that we did Survive and Thrive with as well. We just finished a Women Supporting Women course with them. And it's really sort of looking at what it means to be a woman and how that affects your well-being and learning some of those skills of being more assertive and building your self-esteem. And also just kind of fighting for gender equality in the way that makes sense for you. Somebody said that talking to men about gender is like talking to fish about water. It's just kind of there. It's there. And they don't really think, what is it to be a man? What do I do because I was brought up this way? What do I like about that? And what do I not like about that? So there you go. In a very rambling way, I'm trying to tell you that Humans Being is about asking that question about gender and mental health. And how does it affect us? And can we kind of make our gender roles and our gender expectations a bit more open? So perhaps men can be a bit more vulnerable and can ask for help a bit more. Our next project is actually working with men about women's safety. And this is a joint project with Men's Health Unlocked, Women's Lives Leeds. A lot of women, most women get harassed in the street at some point, or abused and harassed, or even assaulted in the street in Leeds. And I think most men would want to do something to stop that. But how do you do that? How do you intervene in a situation to de-escalate it and keep yourself safe? Well, we're putting together some training on that topic. Next, also, we hope we'll get some more funding for some more Survive and Thrive courses. Fingers crossed.
Well, that's a good place to kind of close, actually, with my final question, which was about funding, Duncan. What would your advice be to funders like us? Is there anything you'd like to be different in terms of that relationship?
I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but I think Leeds Community Foundation is an excellent funder. The application forms and the feedback are generally completely proportionate and flexible, and it's really clear what's wanted and how to apply.
That's a relief.
So, I mean, maybe not everyone thinks that, but I do think that, and the deadlines and the turnaround times tend to be pretty fast. Yeah, sometimes it's good to have more advanced notice. I would say that to build up a project properly and to make those connections and do that consultation and really feel like it comes from the ground up. It's not just the professionals making it up, but we've got really time to develop it through our members and our communities. Having more time is helpful for that. I'd say that. But then again, we do need more money. During the pandemic, we haven't had the increase in suicide rates that might have been expected. But sometimes these things tend to take a couple of years to take effect. And there are a lot more people struggling and in poverty. A lot more people really in harsh situations of crisis. And all that we know about suicide rates and the things that make them happen, those factors are coming into play. So I feel as though there's a great urgency for suicide prevention and there's not a lot of money for it. I also feel as though there's a great power within Leeds, within the volunteers that we have, and just goodwill from thoughtful, compassionate, caring people. But that needs to be unlocked. It needs to be unlocked with the right training and the right information, the right connections.
That volunteer workforce, if you think about that, is amazing. Yeah, I think as a city, we're so lucky to benefit from people's generosity and goodwill and spirit. And it's so much of what keeps resilient communities, going. I think that bit about training and support is absolutely vital. And we mustn't forget that costs money. Infrastructure and support costs money. And we can't have a brilliant voluntary workforce without organisations like you behind them, making sure they're safe, making sure they're giving good, solid advice where they're doing that, and making sure that they are supported and themselves looked after and able to survive and thrive as well. So something for us to think about there, definitely. And Duncan Millard from Humans Being, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're now going to be joined by Cheryl Harrington of Brackenwood Community Association. Cheryl, your project was funded through the Men's Suicide Prevention Programme, and really pleased to have you on the podcast today from Brackenwood Community Association. Brackenwood created a space for socially isolated men aged between 40 and 70, providing activities to bring them together, things like American pool table, darts, table football, table tennis, to help build friendship and community spirit with the overall aim of reducing the risk of suicide. And that project's called Room with a Q, which I really like the name of. How did the project come about, Cheryl?
The project itself came about just through talking to local men. The building that we occupy, the Highwood building, used to be a pub up until about 4 years ago. When we moved premises into the building, we started speaking to lots of local people, and particularly they're saying, there was nowhere local for them to go. And it wasn't the pub environment they wanted, it was just the social interaction. A lot of the men that we are working with are not living alone, but they feel quite alone because they haven't got the interaction from other men. And so we thought it was very important. One of the founding members really drove it forward. He had always loved playing pool in his younger days, and together with a few of his friends, they sourced the equipment and they all helped together to get the room ready. And that was a professional builder actually, but we got and helping to decorate the room, helping to source the decorations, got Leeds United memorabilia in there and Leeds Rhinos, things like that. And so it's very much it's something that was their project, something they really wanted to do to get together. And so that's really how it came about in the first place. As you can imagine, we had so many issues with COVID. When we first got told about the grant, it was literally about a week after lockdown. And so we were like, oh, right, what do we do now? And so in a way, it helped us because it gave us the time to have a building that was closed so we could get on with some of the work. But it also, the amount of hours I spent in a queue to get in a DIY shop was ridiculous, just to get paint or something like that. But it's something that we had an idea that we would maybe have 8 to 12 people in that room all mingling together. And obviously that hasn't been able to happen in that way. We've had periods of lockdown where we haven't been able to meet at all. And then we've had the extra sanitising going on, and we've had to evolve the project and change and adapt at every step of the way through lockdown for the 16 months of the project. Yeah, so that's basically where we're at.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Cheryl. I mean, adaptability and flexibility is definitely something we've seen from all community organisations through the pandemic. And it sounds like that's been a real feature of what you've had to do at Room with a Q. Can you maybe tell me a little bit more about how you knew there was a need for this sort of project in your community?
Again, when I mentioned about, the local pub closing, we're on a sort of an estate that's quite isolated, and it literally was the only pub within, probably within about a mile or so, so it was where everybody went. So all of a sudden, there was no place for everybody just to hang out together as grown-ups. And we noticed that we weren't seeing people that we knew regularly, would see normally. And we were just like, I wonder what's happened to, Pete or Bob or, whoever. And having that place for everybody to come together, I think was very, very important. One of the things that we noticed with the people that have actually come along to the group, one person in particular is a single man, and he was living in a high-rise flat. And throughout lockdown, different periods, he was completely on his own. So for him, this project was very, very important. And, he's smiling now, which is a massive difference to what he was before. And to say he is still quite lonely when he's at home, but he's getting that company. And that was the whole idea of bringing people together to have that companionship and a safe place where they can talk to each other. So when the group is in progress, there's no women in the room. Although I'm very, instrumental in running the project and getting things going. I leave them to it. But when we speak to people about joining the group, it's very much about them needing male company. They may well have a wife at home or children or have other people to talk to, but it's about having male company and people who understand men's issues. And I think that was really important for us, that we gave them a safe space that didn't involve women interfering, in their words.
Yeah, and it's important to hear in the words of men that come to the project as well. And we've got a clip from one of your participants, Gary, who's going to talk a little bit about his experience.
Since joining the group, I've found it really beneficial, meeting other people with similar feelings. And having a chance to speak about your feelings as well and getting things off your chest. So I found that really helpful. It's obviously good fun as well, playing pool and things like that. But the main thing for me is meeting people and shared experiences and things like that. I found it really, really useful to get things off my chest and get things out that I was keeping in the past. So, brilliant.
So that was Gary, who's a participant at Room with a Q, a project that's run by Brackenwood Community Association. Cheryl's here from BCA. Cheryl, could you just tell me a little bit more, please, about some of the things that have happened through the project, some of the experiences of other participants?
Yes, I think one of the biggest highlights for us was probably near the beginning of the project, when we were starting to get the room ready. We had a massive issue in actually getting the 9-ball table. It's American pool table. It's extremely heavy. The room itself is upstairs as well. We'd sourced it, but it was quite a difficult process in actually getting the man to deliver it because of lockdown and this and all these other things. So on the day, we had several different days where he promised to deliver it and didn't turn up. So that was quite challenging. But on the day that they actually turned up with it, set the table up, and the first people were actually able to have a game and 9-ball together. And it was just such a joyous occasion. And again, we were sort of well into lockdown at this point, or just coming out the other side of it, because it was early July. And, having people actually there in person, playing something together, who'd been in the isolation that was being enforced on us, as well as the isolation that they were feeling themselves socially. And this was such an amazing thing to see with everybody. We've been speaking to the men all the way through. And again, in periods of lockdown, they've kept in contact with each other through different social media things like WhatsApp and Messenger, just to support each other. This isn't something that they would have done before, but because they'd already met each other, they'd started to form these bonds and friendships. They'd started, continued to make sure that each other, were coping okay, if there was anything they needed. So again, it's something that we didn't expect from this project, but something that came out of it. So it's an extra layer of that friendship that, we've seen come through this. So again, seeing people smiling that we'd not seen smile for quite a while. it might not be a huge statistic, but it's a fantastic outcome for us, seeing enjoyment and happiness on people's faces.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really important outcome. And it's something that's difficult to quantify, isn't it? And it's also difficult to put on an application form at the beginning. But, in terms of getting to the end of a project and seeing that impact in your community on those men that you talked about at the beginning, Cheryl, as having been in the community for a long time, been known to, you and your colleagues for a long time, and then to see that change must be really special. And I wonder if there's any other sort of changes you've seen for people that have been involved in the project that you want to share.
And again, I think it's about the companionship that we're seeing, and about the friendships that we see. Some of the men I know very personally that were very, very low in their life, and one person in particular has had a previous suicide attempt. It's somebody quite close to me as well, so it's quite difficult to sort of share this, but obviously I want to. His life was, although he had a partner, he was very, very lonely, and spent a long time just on his own every day. Through choice, he would take himself away into the garden or elsewhere. He spends 5 or 6 times a week he's down at Room with a Q. He's the person who makes sure that room is spotless, the table is cleaned, it's ready for everybody to use, and has taken such a pride in making sure that this is an area that every man that walks through that door, it's a safe space for them. And he's the one that throws me out of that room, making sure that this is a man's space, this is our space. But the difference in his enjoyment in life is absolutely tremendous. And again, through other people that are attending, there's a core group of about 8 at the moment, and a few others that attend every now and again. And thinking about all 8 of these regular attendees, again, the difference is massive, because lockdown and the pandemic has thrown that extra dimension into the isolation for a lot of people, but particularly these men who were already feeling it. It's added that extra layer. So the outcome for so many of them that are attending regularly is just fantastic. It's the extra friendship, the enjoyment in life, happiness, all those things that a lot of people take for granted, but they don't just come naturally.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really inspiring, and I think it's given everybody listening, and definitely me, a really good sense of what it would feel like to be in that space at Room with a Q, and how important that is for supporting people's mental health and wellbeing. So really appreciate you sharing that. I know that Brackenwood Community Association, like all of our community groups, has different funding streams. Money doesn't last forever. It's usually for specific projects to do pieces of work in the community for a while. So I wondered, what's next for this project and for your wider organisation?
Yeah, as a wider organisation, we're quite a small organisation with just 5 trustees, most of whom have got full-time jobs or children or other things to do in their life. And we've got volunteers that help us run projects that we run there. We do want to be able to find funding to do more, particularly this project. We've got the room set up, we've got the equipment, so it is something that we can continue, but obviously we've seen such a benefit, it's something that we would like to develop further. So, we're always looking for funding to keep ourselves going. But I think one of the problems is always having to go for project funding rather than your core funding. And that's always the biggest problem for any organisation. And speaking quite honestly about myself, I do have a full-time job, but this is my second full-time job. And if I didn't love it so much, I wouldn't do it, but I do. And so, you give it your all. But it's a fantastic community organisation, and, we know we're helping a lot of people. So, we will all give it our all.
Thank you. And really helpful to share that, because I think some of the people listening to the podcast who've maybe not worked in the sector before won't realise that it's pretty common for people to have jobs across a number of different organisations, especially fundraising jobs, and where money is tight and comes in pockets like that. So it's really helpful to bring that insight, and your passion for what you do at BCA is really clear, Cheryl. I would like to thank you very much for your time with us today. Is there anything else that you want to share?
No, just thank you so much for believing in us and giving us that funding in the first place. It really did give us a kickstart, and it's created an amazing space. I actually remember quite some time ago speaking to one of your other colleagues and actually went to show him the room before we'd knocked walls down and tell him about our ideas. And, I just remember thinking, this is something that I really want to go forward. And then to move forward a year from that conversation. And then, it wasn't even a year, it was about 9 months. And now, we've got this room and we've got it up and running. And it's so great to have somebody believe in our dream. And then we can just develop it from there. So thank you.
No, thank you. We're very lucky to work in partnership with you, Cheryl, and really appreciate your time today. Cheryl Harrington from Brackenwood Community Association, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So much of what the brilliant community organisations we work with do is find, develop and retain that connection for people all across the City of Leeds. The Men's Suicide Prevention Programme is running again in 2022. Check out the Leeds Community Foundation website for more details. This year, the programme has adapted to support not only men, but also other minority groups who are at risk of suicide or who experience risk factors for suicide. For example, members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and thank you to Cheryl, Duncan and Shahed for joining us for this episode of GiveLoveLeeds. If you're listening to the podcast and thinking, I'd like to partner with Leeds Community Foundation to make a difference, then get in touch with us on membership@leedscf.org.uk.
If you are going through a tough time or you know someone that may need help, you don't have to face it alone. You can contact Mindwell at 0800 183 0558 or www.mindwell-leeds.org.uk. Alternatively, you can get in touch with Samaritans on 116 123 or drop them an email at joe@samaritans.org. If you enjoyed this episode, take a couple of seconds to rate it on your favourite podcast platform. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter at leedscf.org.uk. Feel free to email us at info@leedscf.org.uk. Speak to you soon for the next episode of Give Love Leeds.